Last week we finished defining the scope of our project. So this week we are going to create, validate, and control the scope. So we're going to create work rate and structure. And if you imagine a hypothetical scenario that you are planning a birthday of some of your family members or your friend, you think it's planned very, very well. You looked into details of all the activities, and you think you're happy with what you've done and think you covered everything. But on the day, things look a little bit different because you have essentially chaos. Cake arrived, but the size of the cake is too large, and it can't fit into the refrigerator. So maybe you need to cut it so that you can prevent melting of the icing. There's so many kids around, and it's craziness because they have no entertainment, and no one is looking after them or minding them to prevent the craziness, I suppose. As soon as the cake is brought out for cutting, you have a sudden realization that you forgot the candles and the cutting knife, and the camera is nowhere near, so that you can't record the event. As this is all happening, some of your friends are making trips down the road to the spa for cold drinks, for cups and plates, tissues, and so on, to help with the birthday party. And despite you thinking that you have managed so well to prepare this project, it didn't work so well. Now, happens all the time in projects as well. We realize that we forget so many things despite careful planning. Um, and I suppose the kind of reason to think about this, why this happens, is because we are unable to identify all possible activities up front. I mean, the fact that we can't identify them doesn't mean we won't do them, but because we didn't identify them, we weren't able to plan for them. So if we weren't able to plan for them, we weren't able to figure out what was their duration going to be. We weren't able to put some cost associated with those activities, and while they're happening, we have no way of tracking this this activity. And and the fact that most of the activities haven't been identified before the project start, if we have a project, is the reason why in many projects, what the project manager has to deal with, that in most cases is not planning and controlling, but firefighting towards the end of the project, as more and more of the unplanned and unidentified activities arrive in front of you. Um, and a lot of that can be resolved by a thing called the work breakdown structure, and I'm going to be using WBS going forward. And essentially, this is a tool that helps us identify all possible activities and then make the plan practical, reliable, meaningful, and corresponding to the reality. Um, there are plenty of rules for the work breakdown structure. We'll cover them in a second. So as we go through the work breakdown structure, we're going to identify the deliverables, and we're going to hierarchically decompose them so that they form a logical structure. In this process, we're going to deal with 4 inputs, um, 2 tools and techniques, and we're going to produce 2 outputs. And the flow of the outputs are into this process come from the project management plan, project documents, and DEFs and OPAs. And the output of this process feeds into project management plan and project documents. Now we have this example of our birthday, where deliverables are listed and sub-deliverables are also listed. Now we are going to follow some rules when preparing work breakdown structure, and I think those rules are reasonable and useful to remember. So first of all, work breakdown structure always has to be a graphical representation in a hierarchical form. And this is because humans like this kind of descriptions. We like to see hierarchies, and we can easily see the dependencies in the hierarchy diagrams. So that helps with focusing on the and understanding the flow and the relationships between the activities. So one thing that I'm going to mention, and I think it's going to go against what you probably put together in your work diagram structure so far, is that when writing out the work diagram structure, we shouldn't use any nouns. We should only use deliverables. So within work diagram structure, deliverables are the thing to enter, not verbs. It might sound a little bit, contrary to what we mentioned earlier, but because work diagram structure, it is indeed used for identifying all possible activities. But when we represent the work breakdown structure, when we put it on paper, when you have the document together, we're not going to have the activities, but we're going to have deliverables. And those deliverables are going to be broken down further and further into smaller deliverables. Again, deliverables, not activities, until they can't be broken down any further. And that's I suppose the objective of this is to help making sure that everything that we need for the project is listed and taken care of, identified, before we start thinking about what we need to do to achieve that. Because, you can think about things that you need to do, but if you miss one of the things that you need, you'll never think of the things that you need to do to get that thing. So, yeah, always nouns, not verbs.
Sorry, Michael. Deliverable means like we are using project management plan and scope management plan, or like the equipments we are using in the project and the stuff. Are these all deliverables? Yeah.
So, with respect to a specific project, let's say that in this project, we are going to have project objective is to organize a birthday party. Okay. So we have to organize a birthday party for an individual. And within within that project, we have the following things that are required for this project to be successful. We need a cake, we need food, we need decorations. Okay. Each of those boxes or logical levels in the hierarchy are deliverables required for the project success. Now, for the deliverable cake, we require the following sets, the following deliverables, again, the following things for the cake to be successful, to be, good enough to satisfy our quality metrics, let's say. Need candles, plates, and so on. So these are deliverables that we're going to require for the cake. Now, when talking about schedule, you're going to figure out activities that you require to get the cake. So draw a cake with the baker or something like that, bake the cake, and so on. Okay, so these are deliverables. Project scope, project management plan, project documents are components of the approach to managing the project, and they themselves are not deliverables of the project. They're just tools that we use in order for us to help getting to the deliverables of the project. And that's,
Thank you.
I suppose that's a good way to think about this. Now, following the kind of logical structure, the first level of the work breakdown structure was always going to be the major deliverables. It could be project phase, or it could be something like a major chunk of work. So, for instance, if you're building a building, it could be foundation or walls or some other such, or the structure, I don't know, whatever it is. So the first level is always major deliverables. Then, once you have all the major deliverables, each of the main deliverables should be broken down to sub deliverables before you move on to the next one, and it just kind of forces you to be disciplined in how you do it. But if you decide on one of them to do it, to break it down in sub deliverables, you should stick with this one until it's fully broken. It's broken down. It kind of helps you focus and helps the stakeholders who participate in this process focus as well, rather than jumping from one deliverable to the other. Now, the people who are going to be doing this work are stakeholders, not just the project manager, because assuming that project manager knows how some of the subcomponents or the deliverables, major deliverables, have to be broken down into sub-deliverables is, I guess, beggars belief. It's very unlikely that a project manager will understand the project structure sufficiently well enough in order to identify all the deliverables, and that's why stakeholders should take part in this process as well. So what can we say? If you have a past project that if you have a past project that was similar to the current one, you probably should reuse it, because it's no point in reinventing the wheel, and it's a useful thing to do. The lowest level of the work breakdown structure is called the work package. If I go to my example here, not this one, put this one here. This is a work package, disposable place. So within this work package, we have to find activities that will arrive at the disposable plates. So that activity might be going to the shop, picking the plates and paying for the plates and so on. But it arrives at the deliverable disposable plates, and this box is a work package. So each of the work packages should be associated with a control account or a cost account, and it kind of helps with controlling the project, controlling the work packages, accounting for the cost of the work packages, costing the work packages, and so on and so forth. And now you may have many work packages going to the same account, but each work packages has to have one account associated with them. There should be no work packages without an account associated to it. Each of the major deliverables can be broken down to different levels. So if we have a major deliverable that is broken down into, let's say we have a project broken down into 3 major deliverables. The first major deliverable can be broken up into 2 sub-deliverables, and then that can be broken down into 1. This one can be broken down into 2, and this one can be broken down into 1. So it doesn't have to be broken down to the same level. What needs to be the case is that each major work package is broken down into the smallest possible deliverable, so that the project can be carried out. So, like, one work package might be at the 10th level, another one might be at third. Each of the work packages should have some sort of a naming convention and follow it. So say if we're making up a work package, we're going to call each of the main deliverables with number 1, number 2, and number 3. And then looking at number 2, the sub-deliverables here are going to be called 2.1, 2.2, and then 2.2 can be called, we can have 2.2.1 and 2.2.2 and so on, as long as the naming convention you apply to your work breakdown structure represents the logical relationships between the deliverables you're in business.
Michael?
Yes.
A quick wonder. If your deliverables are dependent on the other deliverable, can you show that in your work breakdown structure?
So if they're dependent on the different deliverable, they should probably be structured within the same main deliverable, so to speak.
Okay.
And the dependencies are, I suppose the dependencies are kind of vertically hierarchical. So if they're dependent, say for instance, as in the, let's say, in the house example, you have the foundation work package. So within foundation, sorry, let me just fix this here. Within the foundation work package, you have to first dig the trench. So the foundation is dependent on the trench. Then you have to fill in the trench, and so foundation is dependent on filling it in. So that's how you kind of want to show the dependencies. But activities and the relationships between activities, the ones that lead to certain certain deliverables will be more visible in scheduling, I guess. So, you know, for instance, you can't start working on one work package, one deliverable, until some of the activities in a different work package are completed. That kind of relationship is going to be visible from the scheduling. So we'll see how that kind of happens later on. But in
Okay.
this case, the relationship should be more or less vertical, not necessarily horizontal, I think. Does that kind of answer your question, or not really?
Yeah, yeah. No, yeah, yeah. I was just wondering if it was going to be. I understand what you're saying. Yeah, in the scheduling, you will see that.
Yeah.
You will have it'll. Yeah, okay. The WBS isn't. It should be more hierarchical.
Yeah.
It
yeah,
should
yeah.
be. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's no problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Then again, I think I mentioned already that because we are putting deliverables in work writing structure, not so nouns rather than verbs. Work packages are not activities or tasks. You know, so work packages are deliverables, and once we have that, we're going to use the work packages in other processes, especially in scheduling, to find the activities that project requires in order to achieve given the work packages. So within the work breakdown structure, we're thinking about things, not that activities required to get to those things. We are not using work breakdown structure for sequencing because in work breakdown structure we don't have activities, just the deliverables. So work breakdown structure is going to be used in the scheduling processes to go create activities which are then going to be put in the project schedule. And anything not mentioned in the work breakdown structure is officially not part of the project. And yeah, that's it, really.
When you say it's not used for sequencing,
Mm-hmm.
when you're dropping down, say from 1 to 1.1 to so on and so forth, and you say you finish up at the lowest leg of it.
Mm-hmm.
So are they like those deliverables? It doesn't matter what order they come in. It's just you're kind of recording everything that needs to be
Precisely
done.
that. Yes.
Precisely that. Okay. So it doesn't. Okay. You just have a top level one, and you just kind of basically list all the items, but in separate boxes.
Yeah. And the kind of the relationship is doesn't have to be sequential or anything like that. It's just what's required for what. So again, house example for foundations, you need the trench, and you need the concrete, I think. So these would be the deliverables, but then you would convert those deliverables into activities. Take the trench, mix the concrete, pour the concrete, and so on. Okay. And those are going to be used for scheduling then.
Okay, look. Cool. But I suppose it would be handy, even though they don't have to be sequenced. It probably would be handy if you if you could do it in a sequence, wouldn't it? Because it'll just be easier.
Well, I suppose it could be, but then you're doing the work which is required, which will be carried out in a different process in this process. So you don't need to be sequencing right now. All you need to do is just make sure that you list everything that's needed for something to happen.
Okay.
Okay. So inputs for this process. We have what do we have? We have project management plan and project management plan. For some reason, my pen doesn't want to work now. Business pen. So we have project management plan, and really this is kind of mostly scope management plan, because scope management plan will inform the methodology that will be used to create the work breakdown structure. It may have a list of major deliverables as well. Then project documents you will have the scope statement, which we created in the defined scope process that we talked about last week. We're going to have the requirement documents that we collected in the process of defining scope, so that we understand the features, the functions, and the technical details of the process. And that's going to inform the deliverables that are required. We're going to have to use some environmental factors like regulations, like compliance standards, cultural aspects, and so on, anything that might contribute to the development of that work breakdown structure. And finally, for the organizational process assets, we are going to take a look at existing work breakdown structures from similar projects that we can tailor to the one that we're dealing with now. templates, lessons learned from previous projects, and so on. For tools and techniques, we're going to rely on expert judgment of stakeholders who can help in the creation of practical, detailed work breakdown structure, and so on. So this could be people like technical experts in a given domain, consultants, legal experts, functional organizational heads, team leaders, team members with relevant knowledge, and so on and so forth. We're going to then use decomposition, which is a technique relying on breaking down the major deliverables until the lowest and smallest deliverable is identified. So the lowest and the smallest deliverable is the work package, which is the fundamental component of the work breakdown structure. So once you arrive at the work package, you're kind of finished with the decomposition of a given deliverable, and you can move on to the next one. Now, the granularity, the resolution of the work packages might differ between the projects, so it should be specified in the project scope management plan. How granular do we want our deliverables to be? So for the outputs, we're going to create scope baseline. And for the scope baseline, I want to highlight two things. We have a thing called the product scope. And product scope is essentially the sum of all the requirements, all the deliverables, all the services, all the functionalities requested by the customer. And essentially this document kind of explains in technical terms, gives us absolute details in the project scope. So what should we get out of the process? Now, project scope statement defines the product scope. So product scope is the result of all the requirements, and the outcome of the requirements, what customer wants. The work that's required for achieving this, the work that's required to achieve the project scope, the product scope rather, the work required to achieve the product scope is the project scope. So project scope is the work that we need to carry out to deliver the product scope. Kind of clear on this diagram. So we have project scope, and that can be divided into two things. We have product scope, which is the features of the product, and the project scope, which is all the work that needs to be done to deliver the product scope. And project scope informs the scope baseline. Scope baseline is then scope statement combining with work breakdown structure and work breakdown structure dictionary. So it's useful to remember this kind of division. Now, I think I need to mention is that as an output from the scope baseline, we're also going to create a document called the work breakdown structure dictionary. And that is essentially a document that details everything about the work packages. So it might say how long a work package might have associated with it, what kind of risk are associated with the work packages. Do we have any estimates of cost? Who is going to be responsible for that particular work package, and so on and so forth. Obviously, it's not required for all projects, because some smaller projects with less complexity, you probably don't even need it. You probably don't even need that document. But as the project size increases and the complexity gets higher and higher, the work breakdown structure dictionary might become mandatory, because people who are doing the work might need the detail required, especially if you're outsourcing the work on the project to a vendor. And then the work breakdown structure could become the statement of work for the vendor, so detailing what needs to be done in order to achieve success for that particular deliverable. So we have created the scope baseline. We can update some documents, assumption logs and requirements documentations, because maybe some requirement became more clear upon the process of the composition of the deliverables. And now we can move on to the process of controlling scope. So the reason why you have to control scope is because if we finish the project and the deliverable of the project is outside of scope, it doesn't have what it needs to have, or has more, then we kind of failed at our project. So we need to make sure that the project is as per requirements in specification documents. Because, you know, as the project is progressing, it probably would be bad for us to wait until the end of it, you know, and to find out if the deliverables are as per those requirements, and if the deliverables satisfy the specifications that the customer requires. So as project managers, we should probably institute and place regular inspection points during the execution of the project, so that we assure that this project scope is going in the right direction, that requirements are being satisfied, and that's what controlling the scope does. Now, controlling the scope also prevents gold plating and scope creep. And gold plating is adding extra features that mightn't have been required by the customer. And scope creep occurs, I suppose, when there are change requests which are directly implemented without any formal change control. Very common phenomenon. I'm sure you're familiar with it. So this controlling the scope will prevent it. So then we're going to have 4 inputs, 4 major inputs and a couple of sub inputs there. We're going to use 2 tools really, and then there are going to be 4 outputs out of this process. So for inputs, we're going to put in project management plan. So that will contain the subsidiary plans like scope management plan, which defines the process of controlling the scope, scope baseline, which is going to help us identify thing that we are controlling against, configuration management plan, risk register, the requirements management plan, all those the documents that can inform us about the state of the current status of the scope as expected, so that we can compare the measured, the real world value of the scope, the real world description of the current scope of the project against the basis for our measurement. We're going to input some project documents that might be needed to make sure that the requirements are being met, that things are kept in, and that changes are checked and controlled. So the requirements traceability matrix, the requirements documentation. So for those documents, we need to put in there so that we can see what was requested by the customer, and we can compare it with what's being done, so that we're not doing things that customer hasn't requested. We're not gold plating and the scope isn't creeping. Traceability matrix helps with making sure that specific deliverables match with the specific requirements and features. So if you have a requirement traceability matrix for a widget cranker, you can compare the outputs of the widget cranking making with what the widget cranker should be. And we're also going to input into this is a control process, so we're going to input work performance data, so the raw observations from the directing and managing project work, things like number of requirements completed, things like defects, like errors, things like the schedule issues, like things like cost issues, and so on and so forth. That's also going to include change requests, and there's going to be included in the work performance data, EPAs, OPAs, and the EFFs as per standard. So the cultural for EFFs, cultural, the regulation, the policies, and so on for organizational process assets, methodologies for scope control, for instance, checklists, and whatever else the company has that would improve the process of scope control. 2 tools and techniques, and they're both out in the data analysis family. And the most important of them really is variance analysis, which is going to be carried out in order to see how much of the scope of work is done and whether it differs from what was planned, and whether there is any difference. If there is any difference, there might be corrections made, and if those corrections are in place, the trend analysis will indicate whether the corrections have had desired effect. And obviously, as output, we're going to create work performance information, which is essentially information on how the project and the result of the project, the scope is performing against the scope baseline, and it's also going to contain forecasts about the performance of the scope into the future, and that forecast will inform then the managerial decision about corrective actions. We're also going to create change requests, which will have to be dispositioned according to the integrated change management process. We're going to we might have to update some of the components of the project management plan, scope management plan, baseline updates, the schedule updates, cost baseline updates, and so on. Again, it's all going to come out from understanding how well do we perform against the scope baseline, whether what we are delivering is what the customer wants and specified that they want. And if not, maybe we need to adjust costs or change the schedule. And then when we may have to update some of the project documents, things like requirement documentation, traceability matrix, scope statement, and so on. Anything that might come out from the control and scope process should be updated in this case. Once we control the scope, we carried out the project work, and we are ready to transition from the project work to the customer. We're going to have to validate scope, because the customer would like to validate the deliverables to see if they're actually what was requested. You know, some tests, some checks would be conducted by the customer. The customer would look at the deliverables and then look at the requirements to see whether what's in front of them is what was specified in the document. And then if the customer is satisfied with what's in front of them, they're going to accept the project deliverable, and we'll be on the right track towards the project success. So we're going to have 4 inputs into this process. We're going to use 2 tools and techniques, and we're going to have 4 outputs for this process. Now, inputs into this process include the project management plan, which provides the scope baseline. Scope baseline informs how the final acceptance should be carried out and how the process of validating scope should be performed. We're going to have the requirements management plan and the scope baseline, because these 2 documents are what was specified by the customer, what customer wants, and the required what customer requires, and the customer can then use this documentation in order to validate the scope. We might have to input some documentation, project documents, things like requirements, traceability matrix requires the requirements documentation, quality reports, so that the quality of the product is understood. And again, all those documents are needed to understand the performance of the product, that the quality work has been carried out, that the quality issues have been resolved, that all the problems that have been noted while the project work was being carried out have been addressed and resolved, so that the customer can accept the product happily. Now, obviously, because the customer is verifying a product, we need a verified deliverable. This is going to be an output from the controlling quality process, something that we're going to be talking about in the next semester. It's going to become an input into this process. And coming out as an output from controlling quality, all the tests that are required are done, all the screening has been carried out, so everything is done, and the deliverable is ready for acceptance. And then finally, we're going to have some work performance data about how the product is performing, some degree of variances from requirements, numbers of tests performed, performance against standardized standardized benchmarks, and so on. All those are an input into this process. We're going to use two tools and techniques. We're going to use inspection and some decision-making techniques. And then inspection, obviously, is kind of in the name. It's a post-mortem, let's say, analysis of the deliverables. So deliverables have been completed. Now they need to be checked. Now, the problem with this is that if the deliverables are found to be incorrect or incomplete, they would have to be made all over again and corrected. And that's a problem because it costs money. So, inspections are usually done by the customers or somebody on their behalf. And if the inspections are successful, then you will have accepted deliverable. And then I suppose if stakeholders need to discuss or negotiate about the levels of completeness, I suppose, if the requirements don't fully match the deliverable, or the deliverable doesn't fully match the requirements, the stakeholders might have to negotiate about the level of completeness and whether the level of completeness and correctness of the deliverable matches the requirements, and so on. So there's some decisions need to have to be made, and voting might be one of them. So the types of voting include one person, one vote, which is the kind of standard one, but also cluster voting. So if a person can have 10 votes, and then they can assign the number of votes to a given option depending on their preference for it. So if you love something, you give that thing 10 votes. If you're between two options, you give 5 votes each. And that's how a decision would be made in this case. Now we're going to output 4 things out of this process. Obviously, an accepted deliverable, which is going to be an input into the closing project phase, which is what we want really from all of this business of managing a project. If deliverables are not accepted, then those deliverables might require some corrective action, might have to be reworked or scrapped, and all of this work has to be done through integrated change process. So we have to raise a change request, and that's why change request might be one of the outputs of this process. Obviously, this process is going to generate some information about the product. So we'll have work performance information about the defects, defect densities, the relationship or the adherence to the scope of the deliverable, and which of the deliverables have been accepted, which ones rejected, and so on. So there will be a nice bit of project information, process performance information rather, and then finally we might end up having to update some of the project documents, things like risk register, like defects, like configuration documentation, and so on. And that concludes the final process in this knowledge area. So I'm going to stop recording.